we review the things that have gone over during class time or throwing on the wheel, I think one of the first things that needs to be recognized is the consistency of the clay. If the clay is too stiff, it's going to be very hard to work with. If it's too wet, the clay will be sticky and you'll not be able to control it very well. So before you even begin, make sure that your clay is of the correct consistency. Make the shape of a cone with a flattened bottom. That would be the easiest to work with. Make sure the clay and the wheel head is dry. Set the clay down towards the center of the wheel, and the first thing before you even start the wheel going around, make sure that it's attached very securely to the wheel. So press it down to the wheel head. Then, with the wheel slowly going around, use your finger to seal the edge so no water will migrate underneath the clay. As you start working, you want to go ahead and keep the hands and the clay as moist as possible. Find a way to keep yourself well braced. You want to be able to use your legs and your arms and your whole body, not just your arm strength. So you want to be able to lean into it, use your leg strength to push against the clay. As your hands are touching the clay, you want to use very few parts that will actually be in contact with the clay. So your left hand, the lower part of your hand will be pressing against the outside, and the upper part along your palm here will be pressing at an angle against it. So as your hand cups around the clay, you'll naturally be touching in those areas. So that will be for your left. For the right hand, you're going to be pulling back against the clay, and primarily your two lower fingers and this side of your hand will be pushing into the clay. So your hands will be positioned on either side, pushing in against the clay. For your left arm especially, braced on your leg so that your whole leg and arm is pushing in against the clay. The object of centering the clay is to keep yourself very steady against the clay, not allowing your hands to move around. We'll want to have the wheel going fairly fast. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to go at the speed that the wheel can go, but it should be going at your fastest rate you'll be working with during this session. I'm going to brace my arm and push in against the clay. You can see right where my hand has been wetted. And the right hand against the clay such as that. And squeeze in together. As the clay becomes a little bit more round underneath your hands, then you can squeeze in together to bring the clay up into a taller cone shape. This will help to compress more of the clay more evenly and help you work with a smaller diameter, which is easier to center. I'm going to squeeze in, allowing the clay to come up between my hands, and then as I moisten it again, draw the clay up into a taller cone shape. As I move up along the narrower form, my hands slide into each other so that I maintain the same areas of contact with the clay, and I can remain in control of the clay. In pushing this back down, we want to avoid pushing straight down on top of this. You'll lose control of where the clay is going. In bringing this back down, you're going to have essentially the same hand positions. This part of the hand against the side, but now we're going to move from here up into this small area where your thumb attaches to your palm, and we're going to push at an angle against the clay. Not up here, but over here. In doing this, you would do this with two hands, but I'll show you with one so you can see what's happening to the clay. You'll hold the clay in and actually take the cone and push it over. And as I push down on the clay, it will spiral right back down into itself again. Each time that you work with a piece of clay, you should bring it up into a cone shape and push it back down into a half spherical shape at least 3 times. As you do this, you'll feel the clay become more compressed and more homogeneous. when you believe that you have the clay centered, you want to go ahead and check it by either just holding your finger up against it to make sure that it hits it equally all the way around. You can also do the same thing with a sharpened tool. Just bring it just so it first starts contacting the clay, and it should hit it fairly equally all the way around. Or you can look at one of the etched rings in the wheel head and compare this to that etched ring going around, and they should look fairly similar. If the clay is off-center, it will have a definite wiggle to it, and if your hands are on it, you can feel them moving around. The clay should slide freely under your hand and you not feel any movement except for the fact that it's going around. Once you're certain the clay is centered, you need to go ahead and open up the clay. Slow down the wheel just a little bit. We're going to brace both of our hands around the ball of clay. We want to make sure as we're opening up the clay that we don't lift our hands away from the clay, otherwise we'll lose control over it. I'm going to take my thumbs, either placing them side by side or one over top of the other, and push down into the center of the clay to create the opening. Again, make sure you don't lift your hands up. Keep your hands braced on the ball of clay. Keep your arms braced on your legs. When you feel that you've gone down far enough into the clay, stop the wheel. With a needle tool, push it into the bottom of the clay. Bring your finger down to where it comes out of the clay and pull it out. And we can check the distance from the end of your finger to the end of the needle, and it's still a little bit too thick. It should be about halfway. Go ahead and wet the clay some more and push back down into it. Remember again, don't lift your hands up. Once you've pressed in and created the opening, then it will be time to widen the diameter of the interior of the clay, because the first form we're working with is a cylinder form. In a cylinder, the bottom is flat and the wall comes up at a 90-degree angle to it. So we'll need to go ahead and create the finished diameter of the interior of the form right from the very start. Wet the clay some more. I'm going to take my left hand and either brace it against the ball of clay, such as this, and rest my right hand inside my left hand, or I'm going to turn my left hand upside down, brace my first finger against the outside of the clay, and rest my right hand inside the left hand that way. Both methods will work equally well. You find which is more comfortable for you to work with. In any case, no matter what method you use for this, we only want to widen the interior. We're not allowing the outside to become much more wide than the bottom that we've already established here. So start where I left off with my thumbs, and the only thing I'm going to move is my fingers. I'm going to draw them directly towards me. I'm not going to allow either one of my hands to move. I've gotten to the width I want. Go ahead and stop. From now on during the process, I'm going to make sure that I remove water from the interior after I've finished each of the steps. If I allow water to remain in the bottom for an extended period of time, that will create a much wetter area of clay than the wall, and it could cause cracking later. I'm also going to take this top area that is referred to as the rim and make sure that it's kept very strong by either pushing on it with my finger or wrapping a sponge around the top and pushing down on it. Either way will work. Once I'm ready to pull the wall up into a taller shape, you can go ahead and slow down the wheel a little bit more, wet the interior, And starting on the bottom outside here, and the bottom on the inside, the orientation will be that my inside finger will be here, and my outside finger will be down there. So the outside is always lower than the inside. I'm going to use the sponge in between my fingers and the clay simply because it has moisture in it and I don't have to add excess moisture. But that doesn't mean you have to use a sponge. You can also wet the outside and just use your fingers against it. I'm going to take the clay, if you'll imagine the sponge being the wall of clay, and I'm going to squeeze in, mostly with my outside fingers, to create a thinner wall. I'm going to keep that distance between my fingers once I've squeezed in, and just move my fingers up, pinching and squeezing the clay up. I want to make sure as I'm moving up along the wall that I don't allow my fingers to become closer together. Start with a certain distance at the bottom and maintain that distance between my fingers as I'm pulling up along the wall. Squeeze in. With most of the action done with the outside finger, the form will naturally go more towards a cone shape rather than a straight cylinder. This will help me maintain the shape a little bit easier. If I allow the form to become too wide, it's harder to maintain the shape. Go ahead and remove the water from the inside and compress this top lip. Very important in this top lip to stay very strong. The inside in preparation for the second pull. I want to remove some of this clay down here so I'll be able to get my finger underneath, and I can just use my thumb to scrape away some of that clay. I'm going to again squeeze in, maintain the distance between my fingers, and move up along the form, squeezing the clay as I move up, making sure that I'm not pushing my fingers together any closer than when I started at the bottom. As you're pulling up, you should see finger marks left behind that look like concentric rings going around the clay. If you have motion going up where it looks more like a spiral, that means one side's going to end up higher than the other side. If that happens, you need to make sure that you slow down as you pull the wall up. And to rectify this unevenness up here, cut it off with a needle. Use your left finger on the inside, slowly come in with the needle at an angle. Don't come straight in. Slowly come in at an angle. You feel the needle cut through the clay and touch your finger and lift that ring of clay. Okay. Strengthen the lip. Take the water out of it. Okay. Clean off an area at the bottom to get my fingers underneath. Squeeze in. Squeeze the clay up. The initial goal is to create cylinder forms that are at least twice as high as they are wide. And doing this using only 3 pulls. If you're using more than 3 pulls of the clay, you're over-wetting the clay and it will become weak. Modeling tool, straight edge, and use this to shave off the excess clay out here. cut into the bottom at an angle. By cutting into an angle, I'm going to be able to get the edges of my finger underneath the form to pick it up off the wheel. Draw the wire tool up to slightly larger than the diameter of the piece. Hold it down against the wheel head with my thumbs and draw it under there as the clay goes around. Cradle it, the edges of my fingers, give a little twist, pick it up. Okay.
Okay. Quiet on the set.
For the bowl form, we'll be starting essentially the same way as we did with the cylinder, and some minor alterations when we get to the opening of it.
Louder.
Go ahead and start the opening the same way as with the cylinder. Open up with the thumb. This is the part that will be a little bit different. Rather than pulling straight across, making a flat bottom, I'm going to widen the opening, but allow my fingers to ride up along the clay, creating a curve through the bottom rather than a flat bottom. Pull the clay up, rather than trying to control it, bringing it in, I'm going to allow the clay to just naturally go out slightly as I pull up the form. Knowing that I'm going to stretch out the clay later on, I want to make sure that I keep this top lip very strong and actually thicker than the rest of the wall. So as I pull up the wall, when I get up below the rim of the pot, I'll go ahead and release a lot of pressure, allowing this area to remain thicker than the wall itself. Modeling tool and remove some excess clay from the bottom. I'm going to do this now because later on when the form is much wider, it will be more difficult to reach into this area. So I've removed the excess. Take a flexible rib. I can use a metal one. There are also rubber ones that are fairly stiff or even very loose, but in this case I prefer the metal one. I'm going to take the straight side and simply compress the outside of the clay. Not changing the shape, just making the clay very strong. Since I'm going to be stretching out the clay, if I don't compress the clay out here, it could start separating on the surface. I have the clay compressed. I'm going to clean the water, because at this stage we're going to go ahead and start working very dry. And if we have any water coming into the clay, it can create problems. As the tool contacts the clay. Use the curved edge and start at the top here at the rim. And actually stretch it out. And once I've stretched it out a bit, take the tool and work down into the form. So go into it. It will be more difficult to maintain the same curve without pressing it a little bit harder at the bottom. Down in this area here, it's supported by the clay underneath. Out here, there's nothing supporting it. So it's very easy to stretch out the clay here, but I need to push much harder against the clay to maintain this nice curve through the form. Go back with a dampened sponge and strengthen the lip. And then go back and stretch out the clay some more. It's very important as you're working with this rib that you have it held at such an angle that the clay is moving away from the rib. If I have the rib standing up or if I have it turned back this way, the clay will catch against the rib. My left hand is not doing anything to the outside of the clay, it's merely supporting my right hand. Working with the clay in a very dry way, we can keep the clay very strong so that when we cut the clay loose from the wheel, we'll be able to pick up the bowl form without deforming it. We take this form, cut it in half. Later on, when I trim it, I'll remove the clay and the interior of the foot ring will mirror the same curve that's on the interior of the form. So I end up with a form such as that. With the bowl form, it's necessary to often leave a lot of excess clay down here to end up with the final form and help support the rest of the wall. Is that how y'all remember it? Do we need another one? For the narrow neck form or base form, we'll be starting with the cylinder form, then closing in the form to create a narrow opening. So we'll start the same way that we did with the cylinder. Remember, as you're working on the wheel, especially during the centering process, that your hands can hit against the wheel head, but don't press down on the wheel head. You'll end up having the wheel work like a piece of sandpaper and removing the skin from the side of your hands. Be important with this, we do not allow the top rim to become very wide. If you allow it to become too wide, it's going to be very difficult to restrict it back into a narrower shape. you're working with this type of form, it'd be a good idea to take all this very smooth, loose clay that's coming off as you're working and save it, because we'll be able to use that as we're closing in the top of the form. Later on, when the top gets too narrow to get your hand in to remove the water, unless you have a sponge stick, a sponge on the end of a long stick to remove the water, then you're not going to be able to introduce any water into it. So we'll use the slurry instead. On your last pull, form, go ahead and start moving it into the shape that you want to create. Want the form wider, go ahead and use your rib. Push out from the inside against the rib. As you're pushing out, the rib will compress the surface and keep it stronger at the same time that it's making a nice smooth type surface. Go ahead and complete the shape down here before we start constricting this in, because once you have it closed in, you're not going to be able to get down in to work on that anymore. Go ahead and take this top rim, turn it in, wet the outside. Using your middle fingers and thumbs, you're going to constrict the clay in. Using your index finger, wrap it around the top. That will help keep the top straight as you're pressing in on the outside. Once you've constricted this into a narrower shape, we've also thickened the wall. So we can go ahead and pull this wall up higher. This is the time where we'll use the slurry. Smear that on the inside. And that will replace the water that you would need to moisten the interior. Put a little bit of water out here. And go back over the form, just make sure it's the shape that I want, and re-strengthen the wall. Go ahead and constrict in the top again. Strengthen the shoulder. Continue to do all this while I can still get my fingers on the inside to work on it. This little area of the wall up again, since I've thickened it as I compressed it in. And I can continue to repeat this process until I achieve the narrowing of the opening that I want to. Often during the process of constricting the form in, the top lip will become uneven. And again, using the needle tool, finger on the inside, weak down there, straighten this out. This bottom area here was becoming weak. Because it's a little bit thin down through here, and just the friction of my two fingers here was twisting it down there. So you have to pay attention to what's happening on the whole pot as you're working on it. Go back to this top to cut that off. And my finger on the inside, it's slowly coming in with the needle tool, allowing the wheel to go around several times before you cut all the way through and lift that ring off. Marling tool, remove the excess. Let's go ahead and cut this one in half and take a look at the wall. Shape should be relatively the same thickness all the way up. Moving along, you'll see up here where the rim's left a little bit thicker, but the bottom and the wall should all be relatively the same thickness.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to take that maybe then cut into the different sets, different processes. No. No reason to be here anymore. I've made several cross sections of the throwing the cylinder form. In this first one here, this is what the shape looks like as you just open it up.
Sorry about that.
Oops.
Start all over again, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
I've made some cross sections here of the process of making the cylinder form. If we look at this first one, this is how the form should look in cross section as you open it up with your thumbs. As you move over to opening it up wider with your fingers, you create this very short cylinder form. You see the bottom being straight across and the wall coming up at essentially a 90-degree angle to that. A little bit more thickness there. After the first pull, the clay has been pulled up, the rim stays, and it's much thicker down here at this point. For the second pull, the wall has been thinned out much more. Still, the rim is left a bit thicker to help hold the roundness of the shape. And after the third pull, then the wall is relatively the same thickness all the way up. Some of the excess has been trimmed away from the bottom, but still the rim is left a little bit thicker. And here's the completed cylinder form.